Across the sun-scorched plains of Wyoming, a woman carrying the wounds of her past finds her way to Bennett Ranch, where a solitary man quietly cares for 4 orphaned children he has gathered from lives broken beyond repair. 2 souls who had long lost their faith in love cross paths by chance, and in the stillness of countless nights, a quiet bond begins to grow, not through promises, but through kindness and the courage to stay. But can peace ever last forever? When the storm comes, will love and compassion be strong enough to hold their fragile home together? Don't go just yet. Stay with us as we uncover a story about the true meaning of love and courage. Tell me, where in the world are you watching from tonight? And if stories like this still touch your heart, don't forget to subscribe, so you never miss the gentle lights of kindness still shining quietly around us. The last days of summer lingered over Wyoming like a breath that refused to fade. The wind swept across the wide prairie, bending the dry grass in long sighs, carrying the faint scent of smoke and sunburnt earth. The horizon shimmered gold beneath a sky too big for memory, and the low hum of crickets seemed to echo something ancient. The sound of waiting, of time itself holding its breath. Out here, the land was both beautiful and cruel, a place where silence could cradle you or break you. Down a narrow dirt road that wound between sagebrush and brittle weeds came a woman, her steps slow but steady. Dust clung to the hem of her faded blue dress, and the wind tangled her dark hair around her cheeks, hiding the exhaustion etched there. She carried a small cloth bag tied at the top, light enough to show she owned almost nothing, yet heavy with the weight of her past. Her name was Annabelle, 28 years old, a former schoolteacher whose life had narrowed to a single question. Could kindness still exist in a world that had taken everything from her? She had followed only a rumor. Whispers passed from one town to the next, about a man who lived alone on the edge of the plains, a man who cared for orphaned children as if they were his own. For days she walked, guided by hope and the faintest directions. Her shoes had worn thin, her lips were cracked from heat. But when she finally saw it, the ranch, standing solitary under the dying light, her heart stirred with something dangerously close to belief. The gate was old, its wood gray and splintered, swaying slightly in the wind. Beyond it, a house stood, simple but strong, built from rough timber, its porch half in shadow. A faded lantern hung by the door, swaying as if it too was waiting. Horses moved lazily in the corral, their tails flicking at the flies, and from somewhere within came the distant sound of laughter, or maybe memory playing tricks on her ears. Annabelle hesitated, one hand resting on the gatepost, as though crossing it might change the course of everything she had left. Her chest rose and fell with a deep breath, the kind taken by someone standing on the edge of an old life, about to step into a new one. Then she lifted the latch and walked up the dirt path. Before she could knock, the door creaked open. A tall man filled the doorway, broad-shouldered and sun-weathered, his shirt rolled at the sleeves, revealing strong arms scarred by work. Colt Bennett, in his mid-30s, had the quiet steadiness of someone who'd long since learned how to endure. His eyes, a gray caught between calm and caution, lingered on her face, not unkind, but guarded, the way a man watches the horizon before a storm. His hair, streaked lightly with dust and sweat, framed a face that carried both strength and weariness. "You lost, ma'am?" His voice was low, roughened by years of wind and solitude. Annabelle shook her head. "No, sir. I was told this is Bennett Ranch." "It is," he said, leaning slightly against the doorframe. "What brings you this far out?" She hesitated, glancing past him. Inside, she could see the edge of a wooden table, a lamp, a child's small drawing pinned to the wall. "They told me, you keep children here," she said quietly. "Children with nowhere to go." His gaze sharpened, though not with suspicion, more like recognition. "And who told you that?" "Does it matter?" she asked. "I used to teach. I came to help." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind stirred dust between them. Colt studied her, the tiredness beneath her calm, the tremor in her hand still clutching the strap of her bag. Finally, he said, "Do you have any children of your own?" Her answer came softly, almost swallowed by the wind. "I can't." The words hung there, not a confession, not an apology, just truth. Something in his face changed then, a shadow giving way to the smallest trace of warmth. A faint smile, uncertain but genuine, flickered on his lips. "Well then," he said after a moment, voice gentler now, "I reckon I've got enough for both of us." Behind him, a door inside the house slammed, the quick sound of small feet on wooden floors. A little boy's voice called out something she couldn't catch, followed by a laugh. Bright, fleeting. Annabelle turned toward the sound instinctively, her face softening. Colt noticed. "They're good kids," he said quietly. "Haven't had much reason to trust new faces. You'd have to give them time." "I understand," she replied, her voice carrying the steadiness of someone who had once taught patience to children who had nothing left but fear. Colt stepped aside, his hand resting lightly on the edge of the door. "Come in, Miss Coyle. You've walked a long way." She hesitated once more, not from fear, but from reverence, like someone standing before a church she'd lost faith in long ago. Then she crossed the threshold, the soft thud of her boots echoing against the wooden floor. Inside, the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and clean linen. The walls were lined with hand-me-down furniture, patched quilts, and traces of life rebuilt piece by piece. A place where laughter had once been rare, but was learning to return. A pair of small boots sat by the hearth. A rocking chair creaked in the corner, its rhythm steady as breathing. Annabelle set her bag down carefully. "You built this yourself?" she asked, glancing around. "Most of it," Colt said. "What I couldn't build, I found." His tone was even, but there was pride hidden beneath the quiet. She nodded. "Then you must be a man of patience." Colt gave a faint chuckle, the sound of someone who hadn't laughed in a while. "Patience," he said, "or stubbornness. Out here, they're about the same." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full, alive with the awareness that something unspoken had already begun between them. Two souls, each carrying their own silence, finding in the other an echo. From outside, the wind rattled the window pane, and the prairie stretched endlessly under a fading orange sky. A hawk circled overhead, gliding low as if it too was searching for home. Colt gestured toward the kitchen. "You hungry? I've got stew and bread, nothing fancy." Annabelle smiled faintly. "Fancy isn't what I came for." He studied her again, that cautious light back in his eyes, but now mixed with something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or the faint hope that this stranger might be more than just another traveler passing through. As the light dimmed and the first stars began to bloom above the plains, Annabelle took a seat at the worn wooden table. Colt moved about the kitchen, quiet but assured, every motion deliberate, practiced. The clatter of dishes and the whistle of the wind blended into a rhythm, simple, steady, like the beginning of something that neither dared name. When the meal was served, they ate mostly in silence. The only sounds were the ticking of the old clock and the soft breathing of the children somewhere in the next room. At last, Annabelle looked up. "You've done something good here, Mr. Bennett. Most people wouldn't." Colt's gaze met hers, weary, grateful, and a little sad. "Most people haven't seen what happens when you don't." The fire crackled softly. Outside, night had fully fallen, wrapping the land in silver shadows. Somewhere between that silence and the hum of crickets, something began. Something small, like a seed pressed into the dirt, waiting for rain. And that was how destiny first crossed the threshold of the Bennett Ranch. Morning light poured over the plains like a pale gold river, washing across the dry grass and cracked earth. The air smelled faintly of hay and old wood, and the sound of wind brushing against the porch became part of the silence. Inside the Bennett Ranch, the first days unfolded quietly, not empty but cautious, as if every breath was being measured by time itself. The children watched Annabelle with a wary stillness, their gazes flickering between curiosity and fear. Eli, the oldest, was 10, tall for his age, with sun-browned skin and a frown too heavy for such a young face. His hands were always busy, fixing a loose hinge, polishing his boots, mending the fence, as though if he stopped moving, the world might fall apart again. Nora, 7, carried her silence like armor. Her light brown hair was tied with a faded ribbon, and her gray eyes followed Annabelle without ever meeting her gaze. Finn, 6, was all nervous laughter and skinned knees, his grin too bright for the weight he tried to hide. And Lottie, just 3, spoke rarely in daylight, but at night she walked in her sleep, whispering songs that no one had taught her. Annabelle didn't try to fill their silence. She understood it. Instead, she found a patch of bare earth in the yard and knelt there with a small twig in her hand. Each morning, when the sun rose pale over the hills, she drew letters into the dirt, curved lines and shapes that slowly became words. The children watched from a distance at first, pretending not to care. But curiosity has a quiet pull. By the third morning, Finn had wandered close enough to ask, "What's that one mean?" pointing at the crooked letter she'd drawn. Annabelle smiled, brushing away dust with the back of her hand. "It's an A," she said, "like apple or Annabelle." He frowned. "Or angry." Her laugh was soft, like wind moving through wheat. "That too," she said. "But it's also the start of alive." Soon, Nora began to bring small stones and line them up beside the letters, spelling silent trails across the yard. Eli kept his distance, leaning against the fence, but every so often his eyes betrayed him, following each word she traced, storing them away. In the afternoons, Annabelle gathered them beneath the shade of a cottonwood tree. She sang simple tunes from the schoolhouse days, melodies that spoke of rain, of fields, of coming home. At first, the children only listened, but after a week, Finn began to hum. Lottie clapped out of rhythm. Nora smiled when she thought no one was looking. Even Eli, who always sat apart, started tapping his boot to the beat. Through the cabin window, Colt Bennett often stood at dusk, leaning one shoulder against the frame, his silhouette caught between the fading light and the fire's glow. He didn't interrupt, didn't speak, just watched, the faintest trace of something tender softening his face. The sound of laughter, rising unsteady from the yard, was something he hadn't heard in years, and though he would never admit it, it unsettled him. The way peace could still exist in a place that had seen so much loss. At supper, The children began to whisper around the table again, hesitant voices threading through the clink of spoons and the crackle of the stove. Annabelle never forced conversation. She let it come like rain, slow, natural, gentle. When Lottie dropped her cup, Annabelle only smiled, cleaning the spill with a rag. "Accidents are how we learn," she said. Colt looked at her then, really looked, and saw the steadiness in her voice, the quiet grace that seemed to stitch the room together. On the third night, the wind rose fierce, rattling the windows. Annabelle woke to soft footsteps in the hall, the sound of a child's bare feet brushing against wood. She followed it to the doorway and found little Lottie standing in her nightdress, hair tousled, eyes wide open but seeing nothing. The girl was humming a slow, haunting tune, one Annabelle had never heard. Her small fingers twisted the hem of her dress as she whispered to no one. "Lottie," Annabelle murmured, crouching down. "Sweetheart, you're safe. Come here." The child didn't stir until Annabelle gathered her up, her warmth trembling against the cold. She carried her to the rocker by the fire and began to hum the same strange melody, matching Lottie's rhythm. Slowly, the girl's breathing steadied, and her little head fell against Annabelle's shoulder. She didn't know how long she sat there. Long enough for the fire to fade to embers. Long enough for the night to settle into a hush so deep it almost felt kind. When she finally looked up, she saw Colt standing on the porch outside, his figure framed by the pale light of the moon. His face was unreadable, somewhere between memory and sorrow. For a moment, they didn't speak. The air between them was filled with all the things they didn't have to say, the losses that had shaped them, the quiet gratitude of knowing someone else carried the same kind of silence. Then Colt said softly, "You remind me of someone I once knew." His voice was low, rough around the edges, like a man trying to keep the past from spilling out. Annabelle held his gaze but didn't ask who. She didn't need to. In that tone, fragile, unguarded, she could already hear the echo of loss. He stood there a moment longer, the shadow of his hat dipping low as he turned back toward the barn. The door creaked shut behind him, and the sound of the night reclaimed its hold. The wind, the crickets, the steady heartbeat of the plains. Annabelle sat still, the child asleep in her arms, and watched the faint silver glow of the moon drift across the floorboards. Somewhere deep inside her, she felt the first flicker of something that wasn't fear, a fragile warmth, like the start of belonging. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly, quiet except for the restless breath of the wind. In that silence, the lessons of dust began, small, tender, and unseen. The morning began with a sound that didn't belong to peace, the heavy rhythm of hooves pounding against the dry Wyoming earth, echoing through the still air like a warning. Annabelle was out by the yard, hanging a line of freshly washed sheets that fluttered pale against the rising light, when she saw the rider approaching. Dust trailed behind his horse, turning gold in the morning sun. The man's coat was the color of dry clay, his hat pulled low, and his expression, sharp, tired, and unbending, told her before he even spoke that whatever he carried was not good. He drew the reins sharply, the horse snorting, foam flecking its dark muzzle. The rider dismounted with a stiffness that spoke of long miles and little patience. His boots hit the ground with the dull certainty of duty. From his coat, he produced a folded piece of paper, creased and sealed with red wax, stamped with the state's insignia. "Mr. Bennett," he said flatly, voice devoid of anything but authority. "By order of the state of Wyoming, These children, Eli, Nora, Finn, and Lottie, are not legally yours. They will be placed under care at the orphanage in Cheyenne within the fortnight. Colt had just stepped out from the barn, the morning light catching the dust on his shoulders. He froze, every line in his body turning still except his jaw, which tightened slow and hard. His hand reached for the letter, fingers closing around it, as though it were something that might burn him. He didn't look at the man. He only nodded once, a gesture that carried both defiance and resignation, then took the paper and unfolded it. The words were printed neat and cold. They said nothing of nights without sleep, of children clinging to fever-damp sheets, of laughter slowly finding its way back through broken walls. They said only what laws could see. The rest, the love, the years, the quiet sacrifices, lived outside the margins. Annabelle came closer, the hem of her dress brushing the dust. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. "People can count bloodlines on paper," she said evenly, her eyes fixed on the rider. "But they can't count the nights he stayed awake when fever nearly took them, or the days he went without eating so the little ones wouldn't go hungry." The man blinked, taken aback for a moment, but duty had its own armor. He adjusted his hat and cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I don't write the orders. I only carry them." He turned toward his horse, swung himself up, and added, "You've got until the end of the week. After that, the state takes them. Good day to you." He rode off, the hooves fading into the distance until all that remained was the thin whisper of wind and the sound of paper crackling in Colt's hand. No one spoke for a long time. Eli stood by the doorway, eyes wide and jaw set, the way boys do when they think they're already men. Nora clutched Finn's hand so tight his fingers turned pale. Little Lottie pressed against Annabelle's skirt, not understanding but sensing the dread that hung in the air. Colt folded the paper again, too carefully, and tucked it into his coat pocket. Then he turned, his face unreadable, and walked back toward the barn. Annabelle watched him go, the morning sun glinting off the sweat on his neck, and felt something inside her crack open. Not pity, but a deep, helpless ache. The rest of the day passed under a strange silence. Even the wind seemed to move slower. The children avoided Colt's eyes. Annabelle tried to keep them busy, letters in the dust, songs at the table, but their laughter had turned hesitant, fragile as a candle flame. Every time the door creaked, Nora flinched. Finn asked if the man would come back. Eli didn't ask anything at all. That night, when the house finally grew quiet, Colt sat by the dying fire, the glow painting his face in flickers of gold and shadow. His hat lay forgotten on the table. The letter, now unfolded again, trembled slightly between his hands. Annabelle found him there, staring into the coals like a man searching for something he'd already lost. "You should sleep," she said gently. He didn't look up. "Can't." She hesitated before sitting across from him, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. "You've faced worse storms than this." He gave a faint, bitter laugh. "Storms I can ride through. This one," he tapped the paper. "You can't fight words printed by men who've never seen what it means to stay." He went quiet for a while, his gaze far away, until finally he spoke again, not to her, but almost to the fire itself. "Eli was the first," he said slowly. "His father's barn burned down during a thunderstorm. I found the boy 2 days later, digging through the ashes with his bare hands, calling for someone who couldn't answer." Annabelle listened, her hands folded in her lap. The fire cracked softly. "Nora came next. Left at a church door one winter morning. The preacher's wife couldn't keep her. Too many mouths already. I brought her here. She didn't say a word for months. He paused, his eyes dim with memory. Finn's mother died of fever the same year the river froze over. I buried her myself. The boy was sick too, but he pulled through. And Lottie? Annabelle asked softly. Colt's throat tightened. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of years pressing on his shoulders. Her father was a ranch hand. Good man, mostly. But he made mistakes. When the sheriff came for him, they hung him by dawn. Lottie was 2 months old. I took her before they came for her, too. The room fell into silence again. The kind that feels sacred. The kind that hurts to breathe in. Annabelle rose and walked around the fire to sit beside him. For a moment, neither spoke. The flames cast their shadows onto the wall. 2 silhouettes leaning toward each other, bound by something neither could name. Then, gently, she reached for his hand. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the strength of truth. No one is born a parent, Colt. They become one when they choose to stay. His fingers tightened around hers, rough and calloused, but trembling slightly. The fire popped, sending a small ember spinning upward like a spark of hope refusing to die. Outside, thunder rolled over the mountains, low, distant, but coming closer. The wind shifted, rattling the shutters. Annabelle turned toward the sound, her hand still in his. A storm was on its way, not just of rain and lightning, but of fate itself. The wind began to howl before sunset, rising like a beast from the plains. The air grew heavy, full of that strange stillness that comes before chaos, when the sky forgets its color and the world holds its breath. Annabelle stood by the window, her palms pressed against the glass, watching clouds twist above the ridgeline. The last light of day was swallowed whole, and a sharp bolt of lightning tore across the horizon, turning the land white for an instant, then black again. Inside the cabin, the children huddled near the fire, shadows trembling on the wall. The storm's first cry struck the roof, followed by the drumming of rain that grew harder, faster, like fists pounding to be let in. And over that wild rhythm came a smaller, more fragile sound. The sharp, labored breaths of Lottie. The little girl lay on the cot, cheeks flushed red, skin burning with fever. Annabelle knelt beside her, a wet cloth in hand, wringing it again and again in cold water that turned warm too quickly. Her hands trembled. Her voice, once steady, cracked as she whispered the girl's name. "Lottie, sweetheart, can you hear me?" But the child's eyes rolled back, her tiny chest rising shallowly, each breath thinner than the last. Sweat gathered on her brow, and her small fingers twitched as if grasping at a dream she could not hold. Annabelle's heart pounded against her ribs. She'd seen fever before, in classrooms, in back rooms of towns with no doctors, but never one that scared her like this. Not because she didn't know what to do, but because this time she loved the child as if she were her own. Colt moved to her side, his face drawn tight with concern. He placed a hand on Lottie's forehead and felt the heat sear his palm. His eyes met Annabelle's for one brief second, a silent understanding passing between them. He didn't need words. He knew. He straightened, glancing toward the window. Rain streaked down the glass in violent sheets, and thunder rattled the walls. The doctor was miles away, across the valley, over the rising river that cut through the plain like a wound. To ride out in this was madness. "Don't!" Annabelle said, rising quickly, her voice trembling. The river's already swelling. You'll never make it across. Colt grabbed his coat from the hook, the old leather darkened by years of wear. She won't last the night without help. Her hand caught his sleeve, desperate. If you go out there, Colt, the current'll take you. Please, wait till morning. He turned toward her at the door, firelight flickering over his face. Half shadow, half resolve. For a heartbeat, he looked younger, almost fragile, as though he too was afraid. Then his voice came low, steady, full of quiet conviction. If it were your child, he asked softly, would you wait? The words cut through her like lightning through glass, sharp, blinding, and final. Before she could answer, the door blew, open, rain lashing across the threshold. Colt was gone, swallowed by the storm. Outside, the world had turned to chaos. The wind screamed through the trees, tearing at the branches. The river roared beyond the pasture, swollen and wild, carrying bits of driftwood and foam in its dark torrent. Colt's horse, a broad-chested bay with a black mane slick from rain, whinnied as he mounted, the animal's eyes wide with fear. He spoke to it low and steady, voice nearly drowned by the wind. Easy, boy. We've done worse than this. Then, with a sharp tug of the reins, they plunged into the downpour. The rain was relentless, cold needles stabbing his face, soaking him to the bone. Each breath came like fire in his lungs. The horse stumbled in the mud, hooves slipping on the slick earth, but Colt pressed forward. The world flashed white with every strike of lightning. Fences, trees, the churning river ahead. Each image gone as quickly as it came, leaving only darkness behind. The bridge was already half underwater when he reached it. Waves crashed against the timbers, sending spray into his eyes. He hesitated, just for a heartbeat, then spurred the horse on. The water hit them like a living thing, clawing at their legs, dragging, pulling. The horse reared, its nostrils flaring, and Colt's grip tightened. Go, he shouted, though the word was stolen by the wind. Somehow, they made it across, barely, hooves clattering onto solid ground on the other side. He rode hard, every muscle screaming, the rain pounding harder with each mile. His hat was gone, the world around him a blur of gray and water. He didn't think. He couldn't afford to. There was only the image of the child burning in her bed, and Annabelle's voice in his mind, trembling and fierce. Come back. Please come back. By the time he reached the doctor's cabin, the world was only mud and water. He pounded on the door until it opened, revealing Dr. Wilkes, an older man with thinning hair, spectacles fogged from the warmth inside. Colt barely managed to speak through the storm's roar. Fever. The little one. Can't breathe. The doctor didn't hesitate. He grabbed his satchel, pulled on his coat, and followed Colt back into the chaos. Together they rode through the blackness, each flash of lightning their only guide, the path home now more river than road. Hours later, or maybe it was years, the cabin came into view again, a faint glow in the distance. Annabelle was still at the window, praying against the glass. When she saw them, two figures emerging from the storm like ghosts. She ran to the door before they even reached the porch. Colt stumbled inside first, soaked through, eyes hollow from exhaustion. Behind him, Dr. Wilkes pushed past, kneeling beside Lottie's cot. He worked quickly, checking her pulse, mixing something in a small glass bottle, speaking words Annabelle could barely hear over the pounding of her own heart. Then, after what felt like eternity, the child's breathing steadied. The flush on her face began to fade. She'll live, the doctor said at last, his voice soft, almost reverent. "She'll live." Annabelle pressed a hand to her mouth, tears spilling freely now, though she couldn't tell if they came from relief or the remnants of fear. Colt stood a few feet away, trembling, his hair plastered to his forehead, water dripping from his coat to the floor. His eyes were on Lottie, but his body looked as if it could collapse at any second. "Colt," she whispered, stepping toward him. But he didn't answer. His knees gave out, and he sank into the chair by the door, head falling forward. Within moments, his breathing slowed, ragged but steady, as sleep finally claimed him. Annabelle stood there, watching the man who had ridden through a storm for a child that wasn't his, and felt something inside her shift. Not admiration, not gratitude, something deeper, quieter. It was fear, not of the storm still raging outside, but of the thought that one day the world might take him from her. She drew a blanket over his shoulders, then sank to her knees beside the cot where Lottie slept peacefully at last. Outside, thunder rolled again, distant now, fading toward the mountains. The wind softened, brushing the roof like a sigh, and in that fragile silence, something unseen, something like love, finally took root. The storm left as suddenly as it had come, carrying its fury into the mountains and leaving behind a silence that felt almost holy. The air was clean again, rinsed by rain, and the land shimmered beneath a sky scrubbed blue by mercy. Puddles glimmered in the ruts along the path, and the smell of wet earth rose like a hymn from the ground. Inside the Bennett cabin, sunlight spilled through the windows for the first time in days, catching the dust in slow, golden spirals. Lottie slept peacefully now, her fever broken, her breaths soft and steady. Annabelle sat beside her bed, exhaustion written into the curve of her shoulders, though her eyes were full of quiet relief. Colt moved carefully through the room, still sore from the ride, but pretending not to be. His shirt was torn at the cuff, and his voice was hoarse when he spoke. But every glance he cast toward the sleeping child carried the unspoken weight of gratitude. Not to heaven, but to the chance that mercy had chosen them once more. For several days, the house lived in the afterglow of survival. The children played again, cautious at first, then freely, as if daring laughter to return. The storm had tested everything, their courage, their faith, even their fragile hope, and somehow they were still standing. But neither Annabelle nor Colt spoke much of that night. Some stories were too sacred to retell. On the fourth morning, the mail wagon creaked up the trail, its wheels crunching over gravel still damp from rain. The driver, a man in a wide-brimmed hat with a white beard down to his chest, waved as he passed the gate. Annabelle, hanging laundry on the line, noticed the envelope he left propped against the fence post. The seal was simple, pressed with wax the color of honey. Not the harsh red of authority, but the kind used for invitations or gratitude. She brought it inside, brushing the dirt from its surface. Colt looked up from the table where he was mending a broken strap. "Another letter?" he asked, cautious. Annabelle smiled faintly. "This one feels different." He opened it slowly, the wax cracking softly between his fingers. The paper inside was thick, edges rough, and covered in handwriting. Not the uniform print of officials, but the uneven scrawl of neighbors and townsfolk. Dozens of names filled the page. Some were familiar: the storekeeper from town, the pastor, even Mrs. Garvey from the post office. Others were strangers who had only heard their story and decided to stand with them anyway. At the bottom, in bold ink, were the words, "We, the undersigned citizens of Fremont County, attest that the Bennett Ranch is a true home, a place of care, education, and family. We ask that custody of the children remain under Mr. Colt Bennett and Miss Annabelle Coyle." Colt's eyes widened slightly, his jaw tightening as he read. His hand trembled before he folded the letter and reached for the second page, an official notice stamped with the state insignia. This time, the language was gentler. "The state hereby withdraws the order for removal. The children shall remain under the care of Mr. Bennett and Miss Coyle, who are to be recognized as legal guardians." For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was thick, alive, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Then Finn broke it with a cheer so bright it startled even the wind outside. "They're staying! We're staying!" he cried, throwing his arms around Annabelle's waist. "You're our real mama now." Annabelle froze, not because she didn't want to believe it, but because the words hit her like a prayer answered too soon. She knelt, pulling the boy close, her throat tightening as she whispered, "If that's what you want, then I'll try my best to deserve it." Eli and Nora joined in, their laughter filling the room, the sound of children who finally felt safe enough to believe in tomorrow. Lottie stirred in her sleep, murmuring something that sounded like a song. Colt stood in the middle of it all, the paper still in his hands, his face caught between pride and disbelief. He cleared his throat, his voice rough when he finally spoke. "Listen here," he said, unfolding the letter once more. "It says, Annabelle Coyle, co-guardian, caretaker, and teacher." Annabelle blinked, surprised. "They wrote that?" He nodded, a small smile touching the corner of his mouth, the kind that lived somewhere between gratitude and love. "They didn't have to," he said quietly. "You've always been the heart of this house." Her lips parted to reply, but no words came. The moment lingered, soft, trembling, full of the kind of silence that carries everything people are too afraid to say aloud. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, the house settled into its gentle rhythm. The crackle of firewood, the whisper of wind against the shutters. Annabelle sat alone at the table, the lamplight spilling over the letter she had read a dozen times already. Her eyes drifted to a smaller folded note lying beside it, not in Colt's careful handwriting, but his rough, square script. She hesitated before opening it. "Everything you've done for them today," it read, "let me do for you tomorrow." Her fingers trembled slightly as she traced the words. There was no signature. He didn't need one. The meaning was enough to leave her breathless. The door creaked open. She looked up to see Colt standing in the doorway, his broad frame outlined by the glow of the fire behind him. His hair was still damp from washing, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. In his hand, he held a small handkerchief. Her handkerchief, the one she'd left by Lottie's bed the night before. "You left this," he said, his voice quiet, almost shy. Annabelle rose slowly, her heart stumbling in her chest. "I must have forgotten." He stepped closer, the floorboards creaking under his boots. The space between them closed until she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, smell the faint scent of rain and smoke still clinging to him. Firelight flickered across their faces, catching in her eyes, tracing the rough line of his jaw. For the first time, she didn't see the man who had carried the weight of everyone else's sorrow. She saw the man who had learned how to love through it. He reached out, his hand brushing hers as he placed the handkerchief back into her palm. "You should rest," he murmured. "So should you," she whispered back. Neither moved for a long moment. The wind outside shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of lilac from the field beyond, the promise of spring already on its way. When he finally turned toward the door, Annabelle watched him go, her fingers still clutching the note. Something deep within her had changed. Not a sudden burst of love, but the quiet certainty that this house, once full of ghosts, had found its heartbeat again. And for the first time, she believed it would last. Spring crept across Wyoming like a quiet forgiveness, softening the sharp edges winter had left behind. The plains, once brittle and gray, now shimmered with pale shoots of green. The air smelled of wet soil and lilacs, and the mountains, brushed clean by melting snow, stood blue and still against the horizon. The Bennett Ranch, long marked by struggle, now breathed again, its fences mended, its porch washed by rain, its windows open to a gentler wind. Annabelle stood before the mirror that morning, smoothing the wrinkles from her simple white dress. It wasn't new. It had once been her Sunday gown, but in the sunlight, it seemed to glow with quiet grace. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the enormity of what was about to begin. Outside, laughter carried through the air, the sound of 4 small voices chasing each other across the yard, the rhythm of wooden boots and joy. Under the great oak by the porch, Colt was setting up the chairs, old, mismatched, each one carrying the weight of a memory. He wore a dark vest over a clean white shirt, the fabric stretched across broad shoulders still marked by years of labor. His hair was freshly combed, though a stubborn lock had already fallen over his brow. The way he moved, steady, deliberate, made it clear that this day, however simple, meant everything. The lilac bushes had bloomed overnight, their violet blossoms nodding gently in the morning breeze. The scent filled the yard, mingling with the faint hum of bees and the soft rustle of leaves overhead. The sky was impossibly blue, a promise of peace after so much storm. Eli was the first to notice Annabelle as she stepped outside. "You look pretty, Miss Annabelle," he said, voice bright but reverent. Nora shushed him, though she smiled, clutching a small bouquet of wildflowers she'd gathered herself. Finn tugged at his collar, complaining softly that it itched, while little Lottie twirled in the grass, her laugh rising like music. Annabelle knelt and adjusted the bow in Lottie's hair, her heart swelling as she looked at the children, not of her blood, yet wholly hers. She rose and walked toward the oak, where Colt waited, his hat held respectfully in his hands. There was no preacher, no choir, no fine guests dressed in their Sunday best. Only the wind, the sky, and the 5 small witnesses who called this house home. Colt's voice, when he finally spoke, was low but steady, a voice that had once known loss and now dared to believe in something lasting. "I don't promise riches," he said, his gaze fixed on her, not the horizon. "Only that each morning you'll know you're needed, loved, and home." For a moment, even the wind stilled, as though the world itself had paused to listen. Annabelle felt tears gather behind her eyes, but she didn't look away. She nodded once, slowly, and reached for his hand. The children clapped, their laughter breaking the silence, and Lottie ran forward, wrapping her arms around both their legs. Finn shouted that he was hungry already, and Nora scolded him through her giggles. Even Eli, too proud for tears, wiped at his eyes when no one was watching. Annabelle bent down and pressed her forehead to Lottie's hair, inhaling the scent of lilac and childhood. "We're home," she whispered, and for the first time, she truly believed it. They spent the afternoon together beneath the oak, eating bread still warm from the oven, drinking lemonade that Finn had spilled half of, and telling stories that made the day stretch golden and endless. The house, once haunted by silence, now echoed with the music of life. Chairs scraping, spoons clinking, the sound of small hands tugging at sleeves. As evening fell, the sky turned soft with the colors of lavender and peach. The sun sank low, painting the world in honeyed light. Annabelle sat on the porch steps, her hands resting in her lap, watching Colt hammer a loose plank back into place. There was peace in the way he worked, a man fixing not just his home, but his life. When he finished, he came to sit beside her. For a while, neither spoke. The sounds of the ranch filled the space between them. A horse nickering in the distance, the rustle of the oak leaves overhead, the faint laughter of the children still awake past their bedtime. "You know," Colt said finally, "I used to think I didn't have anything left to give." He looked out toward the horizon, his expression calm. "Turns out, I was just waiting for someone to teach me how to give again." Annabelle turned to him, her smile quiet but full. "And I used to think I wasn't meant to be a mother," she said softly. "But I was wrong. I think I was just waiting for the right children to find me." Colt chuckled low, the sound rich and warm. "Guess we both had to get lost before we found the way home." The last of the lights slipped away, and lanterns were lit, their golden glow spilling through the windows, turning the cabin into a beacon against the dusk. From the road, a traveler passing by might have seen the light and thought it simply a home. But to those inside, it was something more. It was proof that love once lost can be rebuilt from dust and hope. Annabelle leaned her head against Colt's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breath. The children's laughter had faded into soft murmurs from inside. The night settled over them, tender and unhurried. In that moment, there were no vows written in stone, no grand declarations, only two people, surrounded by the lives they had chosen to love. The world had tried to take everything from them, yet here they were, together, whole, unafraid. And as the wind moved gently through the lilacs and the stars began to appear, the Bennett Ranch stood quietly on the Wyoming plain, no longer just a refuge for the abandoned, but a place where lost souls found warmth again. A home not built by blood, but by the courage to stay. Colt and Annabelle met when both their hearts were already scarred. Through patience and quiet kindness, they built something no paper could ever define. A family born not of luck, but of choice. This story is a gentle hymn to the courage of those who stay. It reminds us that a true home isn't made of wood or stone. It's built through the choice to stand beside one another, through loss and through spring. As Colt once said, "Love isn't proven by blood, it's proven by who stays." If this story has touched you tonight, let it linger as a soft reminder that sometimes a single act of kindness can hold an entire life together. Tell me, where in the world are you watching from? And if stories like this still warm your heart, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next light that flickers through the dark.